Good morning, Barrie.
So what is the status now of the TPP 11? Can you get it back on track, and how long do you think that will take?
Well, look, we've come a long way, and we're at, I would describe it as 90% completed. We've got certainly the very strong core elements of a deal, and in fact, at one stage we had reached an agreement between the 11 trade ministers which would see the TPP 11 come into effect. It was then recommended by trade ministers to leaders, and then you've already discussed the consequence of that. So, long story short, there are several matters that still remain outstanding that Canada's raised. We'll work diligently through those, and I'm confident we'll be able to reach an agreement in the not too distant future.
What is the biggest one? What is their biggest sticking point?
Well, look, for Canada, the main issue that they've raised is in relation to a cultural exemption. They would like to be able to carve out elements of their broadcast policy, for example, to allow for French-speaking language. So we get into sort of quite a lot of technical detail. There's really effectively 4 issues remaining. But the point is, Barrie, this has been something that we've been able to put back on the table. We've breathed life back into the TPP 11. I always indicated, the Prime Minister's always indicated, this is a good deal for Australia. It helps to drive our economy. It helps to drive job growth. And I'd reinforce the point that Australians ultimately know they've got a choice in approach between the Coalition or Labor. On this issue, Labor was wanting to walk away from the table nearly 12 months ago, and they would have left Australia high and dry.
But they're reasonable concerns for Canada to raise, aren't they? They've got these rather unique situation in Canada with their French-speaking population.
Well, look, we can accommodate the various positions that are put forward by people. This is always, like any international negotiation, involves a bit of give and a bit of take. But importantly, we have done great work on a very important deal, a deal here that, if successfully concluded, would, for example, in Australia's interests, give us new market access to Mexico, to Canada, countries with whom we don't have a free trade agreement, as well as give Australian exporters access to a market worth some $12 trillion. I mean, that's really significant.
Again, what you're wrestling with here, though, is partly that Trump felt this was Obama's deal, and you've now got a situation where Trudeau is saying this was Harper's deal, that these people inherited it and they don't want it.
Well, I mean, that goes into the rationale behind the Canadian Prime Minister's decision. Look, ultimately, obviously, he's the only one who will know the reason why. In terms of what's being put forward, I'm very confident, and I know that my counterparts in the 10 other countries that form the basis of our discussions around the TPP 11, we all feel that we can accommodate the various requests that are still outstanding. So it's good news. It's going to be good news for Australia.
And what sort of timeline do you think?
Well, this is the $64,000 question. I will have an opportunity to discuss this at the upcoming WTO meeting in Buenos Aires in Argentina in December. That's certainly something that we'll work toward, but realistically, I think that having lost a little bit of momentum now off the back of the decision by the Canadians not to attend the leaders' meeting on the TPP 11, we will just have to keep working methodically through it. That's what it comes down to.
All right, in the meantime, you did manage a bilateral deal with Peru. What part of the Australian economy will benefit most from that?
Look, some of the biggest beneficiaries will be our agricultural sector. There's no doubt that Peru is, a great market for Australia. It's part of a plethora of countries in Latin America that make up a very fast-growing part of the global economy. We know about the success story that is Asia. We know the coalition's put in place our trade deals with China, with South Korea and with Japan. Asia's got strong growth. But I'm increasingly also now putting focus on Latin America, Barrie, because we're seeing really strong growth in Latin America. In the case of Peru, they've been growing at something like 5.9% over the past decade. A population of 30 million people, an important doorway into the rest of Latin America. So these are some of the real opportunities we've got.
You seem to have done that in quite a hurry. I mean, I think it started in May. But is that because you used the TPP as a template to sort of just cut and paste material from that and then apply it bilaterally?
Yeah, in large part. I mean, we've got what we call a TPP plus outcome, meaning we got as good as a TPP plus more. I mean, in this case, Barrie, we'll see inside the next 5 years, 99.4% of all goods going into Peru going in tariff-free. We've also got great access on services, which recognises our future as a services export country, particularly with respect to education. Plus, we've got great opportunities around investment. Now, Peru's got a very big and versatile mining sector. Of course, Australia has real competitive strengths in mining, so terrific opportunities in that regard as well.
Now, on the citizenship issue, given the chaos that has now ensued from all of this, are we at the point now where the burden of proof really has to rest with the politicians, that you just have to start dropping that argument?
Well, look, that certainly seems to be the direction in which it's flowing, and I don't think that's necessarily a great outcome, to be honest. I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, you're considered guilty until you prove yourself innocent. But that notwithstanding, Barrie, I mean, with a surname like Ciobo, I've had 1,000 journalists inquire of me, including David Lipson from the ABC, and so I was dutifully shown him, for example, a copy of the letter I've got from the Italian embassy, which makes it clear I'm not, and nor have I been, an Italian citizen. But, you know, what we need to do is have a pathway forward. There's still very big questions that remain around, in particular, some of the Labor members of Parliament. We've seen where questions have been asked of coalition members that they've stepped up. You saw it most recently yesterday with John Alexander. And yet we unfortunately have a situation where people like Justine Kay, Susan Lamb, Josh Wilson, big question marks about the time in which they renounced or claimed they've renounced their citizenship, and when held against the standard that the High Court recently set, they would appear to be out. And but yet Bill Shorten has gone missing in action on this issue. There is
the difference, though, that we discussed just before, is that Labor can argue that their people took reasonable steps. They at least tried to do something about it and to renounce their citizenship, where I think in every case on the coalition side, they hadn't done anything until their names came up.
Well, there's a big difference here, Barrie, and the big difference is that in this case, the question marks over the Labor MPs relates to where they actually knew that they had dual citizenship, and I understand, and as has been reported in the case of Justine Kay, she has admitted that she withheld actually renouncing her citizenship until after the nomination. So that's why there's a big question mark on that. That's a different situation to a situation like John Alexander, where he was oblivious to the fact that because of the legacy issues, the inherited citizenship, that he had a problem. So I actually think that makes Labor's position even weaker, because you actually have MPs in this case, potentially 4 Labor MPs, who know they had dual citizenship and who have questions to answer. And yet, as I said, on this issue, the Labor Party has gone absolutely missing in action on their 4 MPs. And the reason why that is, Barrie, is because they want chaos. They don't want this resolved. They would rather play political games than actually help settle this issue.
But it looks as if all 4 will be referred anyway. I mean, that seems to be the government's intention.
And they should be. And they should be, because there's questions there to be answered.
Just on the Queensland election, finally, and the LNP has announced that it's putting Greens last everywhere. Is that your view, that the Greens are a greater threat to Queensland than One Nation?
Absolutely. That is my view about the Greens. I think the Greens are a very dangerous political party. I think that they, when it in particular comes to economic policy, would effectively bankrupt a state if they're in a position where they held a balance of power. We're still paying the price, frankly, Barrie, of when the Greens were last in coalition with the Australian Labor Party at a federal level. So these are the kinds of matters that we've got to deal with.
By articulating that view, though, aren't you, in a sense, building on the strength of One Nation? You're making them a more legitimate party, and as you see from the latest opinion polls, One Nation's going gangbusters.
Look, ultimately in Queensland, the choice that Queenslanders will have, Barrie, is a choice between an LNP-led government or a Labor Party-led government. Now, we know, and I'm not going to pretend that there's not support for One Nation out there. We're detecting it, you're seeing it in the polls. I respect that some Queenslanders hold the view that One Nation's putting forward a policy framework that they're comfortable with. I will always argue against One Nation as an alternative. I, of course, would like to see them anchor their support behind the LNP, because only the Liberal National Party have the kinds of policies that will provide the right framework to make sure Queensland provides job growth, economic growth, and ultimately pays down the mountain of debt that Labor has left behind.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.